Today's current events are having a big impact on our students. Concentrating on learning is getting harder and harder. And being away from school, friends, and teachers has made it even more challenging. As music educators, we are uniquely suited to see where our students need the most support and to help. Music education can play a critical role in social emotional learning, or SEL. SEL is an approach that teachers can use to spot challenges and create powerful experiences that encourage self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. Skills every student needs right now. Musicians are goal setters. We have high standards for musicianship and ourselves. There are 3 goals of SEL that are a perfect fit for us. Our focus can build a stronger sense of identity. Learning to play music along with others builds a community of belonging. The music classroom is a space where every student's agency can be practiced and embraced. When music and SEL work together, students thrive. They learn how to apply the discipline we have in music to other areas in their lives, setting goals and achieving them. When you embed SEL into your music classroom, you also help students express their emotions in constructive ways, in tune with each other. Students learn to become resilient, navigate social situations better, and to advocate for themselves and others. They learn empathy. SEL works for student empowerment, and there has never been a better time to put it into action. Let us help you embed SEL into your music classroom. Go to artsedsel.org or savethemusic.org to learn more. Putting SEL center stage.
Hello and welcome to the Student Empowerment through SEL in Music Education webinar series. Thank you for being here for episode 2, Belonging and SEL in Music Education. My name is Rebecca Hoff from Save the Music Foundation. Save the Music is proud to partner with the Center for Arts Education and Social Emotional Learning to produce this free webinar series. And lastly, this work was made possible through the support of KKR COVID Response Fund, a sponsored project of Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors. We thank them for making this possible. Now it is my pleasure to introduce you to our facilitator for today's episode, Kira Rizzuto, Director of Programs and Partnerships for the Center for Arts Education and Social Emotional Learning.
Thank you, Rebecca. And hello to everyone who is joining us live for this episode. I am delighted to be here on behalf of the Center for Arts Education and Social Emotional Learning as we explore this important topic of belonging through music education. Tonight, we have the opportunity to focus on some of the ways music educators establish supportive routines and demonstrate the value of relationships and community so the music classroom becomes a welcoming space and lifts up the voice and cultural assets of every student. I'm so grateful. 2 inspiring guests, Alysia Lee and Darlene Machacon, are with us for this episode. They each have a great deal to share about the practices that they rely on to build an inclusive learning environment where students develop a sense of authentic belonging through music education and a foundation to flourish as musicians and individuals. So we will begin by hearing from Alysia Lee. Alysia, a Kennedy Center citizen artist, has a full circle role as an artist, arts educator, teaching artist, and policymaker. This gives her a broad perspective of the arts ecosystem. Alysia receives national recognition for advancing access, equity, and decolonization with artists, organizations, and communities. Her methods center on anti-racism, creativity, and justice. Alysia is the founder and artistic director of Sister Cities Girl Choir, the El Sistema-inspired Girl Empowerment Choral Academy in Philadelphia, Camden, and Baltimore, which is in its 10th season. She was selected from an international pool of applicants to the third cohort of the Sistema Fellowship at New England Conservatory in 2011. Alysia is the Education Program Supervisor for Fine Arts Education for the Maryland State Department of Education across 5 arts disciplines. She supports the statewide arts learning community and advances arts-rich lifelong learning in and through the arts for all Marylanders, and is the president-elect of C-Day, the State Education Agency Directors of Arts Education. Alysia is the series editor of Hal Leonard's Exigence for Young Voices, the new choral series uplifting Black and Latino composers for young choir ensembles. Her piece, Say Her Name, is published by Hal Leonard. Alysia has also had recent composition commissions by Baltimore Choral Arts, Portland Lesbian Choir, and Gala Choruses. She is a faculty member of the Peabody Conservatory of Johns Hopkins University, and she is a board member of Chorus America. I am also excited to welcome Darlene Machacon a bit later in the program. Darlene is an elementary music teacher, chorus director, and piano instructor in Orange County, California. She holds 2 bachelor's degrees in music education and piano performance from Biola University, and is currently pursuing a master's degree in music education from Vandercook College of Music. In addition to teaching, Darlene is an active presenter, social media content creator, and author whose work focuses on challenging the status quo of music education. In her free time, she enjoys trying new food spots with her husband. So right now, it is my honor to invite Alysia Lee to join us and to share her powerful work. Alysia.
Thank you so much, Kira, and thank you to the Save the Music Foundation and Arts at SEL for this opportunity to share. So when I think of belonging in music classrooms, I'd like to offer today that the creative process, the generation of new works, is an excellent artistic process to build and sustain communities in classrooms. The great poet Lucille Clifton tells us that we cannot create what we cannot imagine. And so it's so powerful to remember the power of imagination and the power of creativity. And we as music educators are dealing in the fundamental building blocks of revolution and community transformation. We are building the fundamental building blocks of justice. And so what makes creativity radical? Well, that we utilize collective processes to build critical and creative orientations for learners. On the next slide, you're going to see the Maryland Creative Process Map, which is a tool to guide teaching and learning. It's also been used in Maryland as a resource development guide or even a strategic planning tool over at the State Arts Council. And it's a tool that we use at Sister Cities Girl Choir across all 4 artistic processes: perform, connect, respond, and create. The tool helps students to orient themselves through the process, and it helps them to navigate the artistic processes they're working in, especially when they're working together, when they're working collaboratively. So we start with inspire, where we take a big idea and begin to examine it that's really relevant and exciting. We explore it and move our idea to a draft. Then we elevate the work, hopefully collaboratively using feedback. And then we assess if it's ready to present. If it's not ready to present, we elevate some more. And once it's ready, we present the work out to the world. All right, so I was doing all those little movements of our little icon there. Next slide, please. When we engage students in standards-aligned, process-driven teaching and learning, we explore exciting and relevant big ideas. We weave in dynamic assessment tools. And when educators and students work together to gain fluency in different aesthetic repertoires, that's right, then the music classroom can build a strong sense of belonging. Also, when we integrate authentic opportunities for learners to share their voice and their agency, and we utilize collaborative learning structures, we build more space for belonging. And when we demonstrate understanding and empathy, towards our students and with each other across from student to student as well. And we build strong and caring relationships that we can also leverage, to increase the rigor and the risk of the creative process. Then we have an opportunity as well to make space for community exchange, right? Moving beyond transactional relationships with students and families and communities, but instead elevating ourselves to build transformational relationships. And that's how we look at building belonging over at Sister Cities. Now on the next slide, you'll see that in 2018, Sister Cities Girl Choir drafted an arts strategy goal. So we wanted to move from being a performance-centered music learning space for youth to a more balanced learning space. And there's a ton of reasons why, yes, but mostly because we wanted to build a space that was more balanced, where our musicians could utilize the creative process as part of our mission around social change. So our goal was by 2024, 50% of our repertoire would be original works from our community, from the youth, the staff, and the families of Sister Cities Girl Choir. Next slide, please. So I want to give a shout out to the incredible teaching team at Sister Cities Girl Choir, we were all performance and conducting majors. And so to take this leap, to be brave enough and bold enough to delve into composition was a real leap, but we leapt together. And if you're interested in hearing more about that experience, we did a really great webinar series called the Conductor Chat. And you can find the link to that in the digital swag bag that our stage manager so gracefully dropped in the chat earlier. So please do check out that swag bag. It's full of goodies and lots of ideas and tools and resources and all of the things I've been sharing today. Next slide. So one of the wonderful things about last year, right? Last year was a very tumultuous year, to say the absolute least. We were living through a double pandemic, right? We were seeing an uprising around the systemic racism that is a part of our American history. And we were also, of course, experiencing this global health crisis. And so one of the things that we were so glad that we were able to do last year was meet our goal early. Last year, we collaboratively composed 9 original songs with the youth of Sister Cities, in addition to all of the songs that they performed, right? Previously composed songs. I'd like to share a little bit about that with you today. So today I'd like to share one of the artistic products. We commissioned a collaboratively composed song from the Big Sister Ensemble of Sister Cities. Most of these singers are in middle school, a few elementary school students. And of course, middle school is a tough time socially for kids. So we use different processes and tools for each song. And so all the songs are very unique, but the common denominator was the creative process map that we showed you earlier to orient us and whoever our guest artists were through the process, and that we would write all of the songs collaboratively. That was a key part of doing this work together. So this collaborative composition that I'm going to share with you today is called Home, #saltwater, sand, and fish. And it's written and arranged by the students. So we started with Inspire. We presented a big question to the students. What makes home? And we were guided through some slam poetry exercises and writing by world slam poet champion Denise Froman. Please check her out. And we shared about the smells and sights that make home for each of us. And that vulnerability really invited some much needed connection during a really hard time. One of our students, Chelsea O, her poem Home really captured the imagination of many of the students and the staff, really. It was full of imagery and it was so culturally specific. The opening line, cousins with no blood relation. Some have misunderstood that line to think that it's a line about fractured homes, maybe foster families. But actually, many of us that are from Black and Brown communities really understand inherently that the line speaks about unity. The way that Black and Brown people build familial bonds with their neighbors and friends. Growing up, I always had play cousins. Yeah. And when we walk through the neighborhood, when I walk through my neighborhood, I don't just encounter friends and neighbors. I'm encountering uncles and tias and nephews. Yeah. And as I go, and more play cousins too. Yeah. So not strangers in my neighborhood, and not even neighbors, but family. And so she was speaking to that very specific way that a lot of Black and Brown people live together. Then we explored, right? Then we worked with the incredible Dr. Martha Gonzalez, a Chicana artivista from East LA, and the lead singer of the Grammy Award-winning band Quetzal. And she worked with a group of 10 students in a 2-hour composition workshop backed by the band Quetzal as well. And after setting some creative norms like don't yuck my yum and don't giggle my wiggle, when you share your idea, and also this second one, when you share your idea, trust that it will change and it will grow. Okay. So not holding on to things too much. We elevated the piece after that. We refined it by arranging it for choir and allowing the students to make those choices around voicing options and being able to work collaboratively to decide and articulate those choices. Those are their artistic choices. And so now I present to you the virtual performance of Home, #Saltwater, Sand and Fish, an original song about belonging that was created through a process that helped us deepen our own connections during a year of turmoil. Please enjoy.
Home is love, home is family. Cousins with no blood relations, they don't know you but they do. Homies people, they got nothing but give everything to you. Cousins with no blood relations, they don't know you but they do. Homies people, they got nothing but give everything to you. Natura stands in the corners, they hustle to make money. Words cut off, spoken fast, what a thrill. Home is love, home is family. Salt water, sand and fish, not just people you live with. Rays of sunshine, warms the skin, feeling like it's so bright within. People models bustling with music. Home is family. Nostalgic feeling of warmth. Home is family. El vendedor de caña. Home is family. Providing joy all around. Home is family. Natura stands in the corners, they hustle to make money. Words cut off, spoken fast, what a thrill. Home is love, home is family. Salt water, sand and fish, not just people you live with. Rays of sunshine, warms the skin, feeling like it's so bright within. Home is love, home is family. Salt water, sand and fish, not just people you live with. Rays of sunshine, warms the skin, feeling like it's so bright within. Home is love, home is family. Home is love, home is family.
Bravo, or as we say at Sister Cities, braze, braze. So definitely check out that swag bag, and you're going to see some ways that we looked at the impact of this kind of radical creativity, right? And you'll see around the metacognition of our students, of course, their reflection. Thanks so much for saying nice things about the song in the chat. Building those creative orientations, being able to also integrate and have students speak at the top of their intelligence, show up by integrating other content as well, building relationships, community exchange, learning, using collaborative learning structures structures. So all of those important things. So I would just say all that to say, don't forget, I think one of the most important critical things when we're thinking about belonging and the music classroom is there is magic in the processes, on the next slide, please, of creating. There is magic in that process of creating, that it can really bring folks together. It can make us vulnerable. It can allow a lot of space for dialogue and sharing. And so a great tip that I'd like to share is if your classroom is very performance heavy, just consider ways that you can utilize the big ideas and the pieces that you're exploring in your repertoire to invite some creative process, some songwriting, inviting some composition into the space as a way of really allowing all of those key fundamental SEL skills, but specifically belonging, to be a vibrant piece of your classroom experience. Thanks for the share.
My goodness. I am just struck by how that video that you selected embodies this concept of belonging, and so grateful for all that you shared so quickly in that segment, Alysia. And I am looking forward to digging in a little more when we have some conversation shortly. But before that, tonight, it is also my honor to introduce Darlene Machacon and to invite her to share about her work. So Darlene, welcome, and without further ado.
Hi everyone, thank you to Save the Music and Arts Ed SEL for this opportunity to speak with all of you today. And I'm so honored to also have this conversation with the amazing Alysia Lee. Thank you, Alysia, for sharing that very inspirational song with all of us. I definitely felt at home listening to them. So this evening, we're going to continue this conversation on interrogating what belonging really is in the music room. And earlier, we heard a piece of music on what home means to these students. And in the next slide, you will see a question. And that question will be, what does belonging look like for you? And I invite us to answer that question in the chat using any of those prompts below as sort of your guiding point. For example, I belong in places like, or belonging feels like, or I know I feel like I belong when. So I would love to hear your thoughts on what belonging means to you, and I will also add mine as well. I know I feel like I belong when I am fully accepted for who I am. Belonging feels like home, feels like acceptance. I mean, there's so many coming in. Shared understanding, be myself without embarrassment. Yes, keep it coming. Second, family, inclusive values, without judgment, connected, being in my own skin. Yes. I'm feeling appreciated. And our voices are valued, yes. Love it. Keep it coming if you have not gotten the chance to put it down there. And as we start piecing together what social and emotional learning looks like in that way, it's important for us educators to take the time to use our lived experiences to define belonging for us, as well as seeing what it means for others around us. As you can tell from the chat box, we all experience belonging in both similar but different ways. And now let's think of our students with their many different identities, backgrounds, and prior lived experiences before walking in that music room door. They join music class because they want to be a part of something. They want to be a part of something bigger than themselves. So in the next slide, we'll talk about, well, of course, music education and SEL are connected. They aren't two separate subjects. They really do seamlessly fit together. SEL can already happen within music education, but music ed is not automatically just SEL. Just because we're strumming ukuleles together doesn't just already automatically mean it is intentional and it is thinking of our students first. And I trust as teachers, I believe that we can all agree that attending to social and emotional needs is important for our students, but many of us music teachers actually may already be trying to implement this already without even putting the label of SEL on it. We need to continue to give these chances for students to share their culture and express their passion through different areas of music making. It is embedded into the overall culture. And let's not forget too that before we implement SEL on our students, we teachers must take the time to use these social and emotional skills on ourselves, even in situations outside of the classroom. So, for example, how are we building self-awareness within ourselves? How are we cultivating relationship skills by building those partnerships with our colleagues in our school building? This includes seeing how SEL translates to the everyday parts of our lives, as well as modeling these skills for our students. All right, so now we adults have an idea of what belonging can look like in the music room and, just in general, but how can belonging be a challenge? In the next slide, you'll see one sentence. True belonging can happen with a lens that sees all students and their musical experiences. And it doesn't stop at just seeing, because if you're like me, sometimes I'll just see something, but that doesn't truly mean that I've looked at it, thought about it, observed it. Belonging not just sees the person, but also validates and makes effort to ensure that exclusion does not happen. From there, before we even think about incorporating feelings of belonging in SEL, we have to look at our classroom walls, our materials, our management procedures, our curriculum, our identities, especially in conjunction with our students' identities. Using these feel-good lessons or 10 minutes of silent reflection really shouldn't quite be a cover-up to claim we are meeting these SEL needs when the core of our content and what we choose to focus on actually makes belonging more of a challenge for some of our students. And some people may call this work anti-bias, anti-racist, or anti-ableist, and others may simply just call it good teaching, keeping students first. But the first step for us as teachers is we must consistently examine our multiple identities and our different positionalities. We cannot also ignore the concept of power dynamics in the classroom. Does the teacher hold most of the power in the learning environment, or do students know they have agency over their own musical learning? Once students feel safe with their identities, well, first of all, community has to happen first, because that is the first instance where students will determine if they belong in a space or not. That comes down to, of course, many things I know us teachers do. Greeting them at the door, making sure what's on our walls really reflects our students, and also thinking about what isn't on our walls. That also includes what kind of music we deem as important, as superior, and what music is implied as inferior. What kind of musicians do we deem as real musicians and they're just other musicians or other kinds of music? How do we react when we hear music that is different for us but is loved and appreciated by our students? Do we stick to choosing repertoire that has a quote-unquote good teaching concept but then it has no connection or meaning to our students? Think about what musical skills are praised and which aren't praised. And do we also take the time to have conversations when students' biases turn into harmful stereotypes? I've unfortunately heard so many stories of music teachers in the past who have shamed students for liking rap or not singing with proper classical technique or playing keyboard with the wrong fingerings, or basically saying that they're not doing music in this cookie cutter conservatory musician style. And even if that teacher uses SEL lessons on the side, that bigger piece of belonging is still missing. Before students even have a formal music class, they already experience music in their everyday world through video games, through social media consumption like TikTok, the radio, the music their family plays at home. And to shut down those outside musical experiences or to not validate other ways of musicking is creating a barrier more than a bridge. And belonging can't quite happen when we gatekeep music education like that. This can also be connected to what is called culturally responsive teaching, a framework by Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings, and those practices can be used as a lens to look through SEL in music. Students are not vessels who need to be filled, but are already assets ready to shine in the music room. So what are our next steps in building towards this? I understand that last school year and also the start of this year is not easy. I don't know about you, but I'm already feeling like it's the month of April. Before the start of this school year, teachers were told just to focus on building relationships, as if we weren't already doing that, or just do some SEL. But I want to also take the time that for some of us, including me, we have not seen students face to face since March 2020. And many of our students have not been in in-person school environment since March 2020. So there has been a huge adjustment, as well as coming out of the trauma of giving and giving during this pandemic teaching. So I want us to also acknowledge that space. So now when we start to think about belonging, it really starts about examining ourselves first. And in the next slide, you will see that it really takes time. We really want to take time to examine ourselves. That includes examining any preconceived notions and biases, and even musical biases. The second is knowing that this work is not to be done alone. Find community with other like-minded teachers. Maybe find a teacher buddy you trust and can help you keep you accountable in this work. Perhaps go on social media and learn from the work of content creators who have already put out free work for us to learn from. And of course, this does not happen overnight. It does start little by little in order to build that in your classroom. But think of small steps you can do, maybe such as double checking that song you're going to do next week, or perhaps for your planning period, use those 5 minutes to double check on what your reaction is when you hear other kinds of music you're not familiar. And it's through these steps that we can be on the road to creating a welcoming space for our students.
Thank you, Darlene. My goodness, I'm so glad we have time for discussion here, because in both of those segments, there were so many things that it's wonderful to have the time now to just unpack a bit further. And I am just delighted that we have the time to do it, and want to, before we transition into our discussion, I want to just thank you for grounding us in some of the really core foundational principles that are necessary for building that sense of belonging. So I heard some words in both segments like community. And that is one thing that if we can begin to unpack a little further right at the top, I think that'll really transition us well into some of the other questions that are coming up in the Q&A, and other things that we can spend some time on. But before that, I just want to say, as this discussion begins, I want to say thank you to my Arts Ed SEL colleague, Dr. Ural Lashley, who is here to support. He is, working within the Q&A and the chat, but also just to acknowledge and to thank Dr. Lashley for all of the work that, he brings to his role at the center for the position of student empowerment. And so while we're here, I just wanted to briefly, pause to say thank you and acknowledge publicly how grateful I am for all of your contributions.
You're way too kind. It's my pleasure to be here for what is going to be clearly a powerful conversation. So I'm happy to support, and I hope everybody enjoys it. And definitely keep sending some questions in the Q&A so we can make sure to take advantage of all the knowledge that Darlene and Alysia both have.
Yes, thank you. So let's go back to that theme of community. And I would like to ask each of you to share your thoughts. What are some of the norms or some of the community agreements that you could talk about that educators might establish or emphasize as they become more intentional about embedding social and emotional learning into the curriculum in a more intentional way to build that sense of community? And so that the voice and cultural assets of all students are, really present and given space. So how would each of you, describe some of the things that you rely on to build those norms and routines?
Well, one that I mentioned that I love is that idea of don't yuck my yum and don't giggle my wiggle, which just is a funny way to remember that all ideas are important. and also that the power of the collective is that the chaff ideas, the ideas that aren't quite properly formed all the way, can become the most innovative, out of the box, spectacular solution that solves all of our problems. And I'll take one step back from that and just saying the other piece I think that is key is that, of course, teachers build norms with their students. That you take the time at the beginning of the year, even if each class has a different set of norms, and I understand how cumbersome that is, but that's why we have, we got flippy pads everywhere, but it's important that you build those norms with your students and that you have regular times. All the students should know them by heart. Something we do at Sister Cities is do an exercise at the beginning of the year where we just talk about the values. What are the values that make a person a good musician? Right? What do you need in order to be a great musician? We build those, we talk about that together, right? And we get the students to bring in the ideas of what they need to see, right? And that's a launch pad to then create norms. So they create the norms. The norms belong to them. And my favorite thing to see is I don't enforce norms. I'm not enforcing normal things. I'm not here to do that. The students can do it on their own. The students can say, oh, actually, we don't insult each other like that. When if you don't like the work, what we do is we just ask more questions to try to get more clarity on what the person was saying. If you don't understand it, that doesn't mean it's bad. It means you have more questions. So the students can help to do that, to set that tone, because they're their norms. And that involves a lot of trust, and it gives them a space also to set the tone for this community. This is an opportunity for every art student. It's an opportunity to build a utopia, the world you want to see that we don't see everywhere. You can build that world here, try it out, right? And so we want to build that space and give them those tools to create those norms. Darlene, what do you think?
I love that you leaned into the students will then feel empowered to, work with each other to influence the way things are communicated in that sense of, community space. So love that. And I think there was one other piece that a person asked related to that, but I'd love to hear your answer, Darlene, and then we can come back, Alysia, to just maybe close us out on this particular thread. But Darlene, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, for more context, I teach TK through 6 general music. I see the kids once a week for 30 minutes, and oftentimes I hear, the excuses, how do you do this? We have such a limited amount of time. And I go, you mean we choose to make time for what we want to make time for. And when we want to make time for something, it's going to happen. So a lot of just everything we do is not just musical, but it ties to their identity. It ties to reminding them of their value, because that's why we have a community, because they are important. For my younger ones, we sing a song by at Miss Katie Sings from Instagram and TikTok. And the words are, I am enough. You are enough. We make space for all of us. Simple song. We repeat it every week, but those words are just going to be automatically in their souls. And just as little kindergartners having that affirmation for themselves, and then pointing, literally, these little 5-year-olds with their little fingers pointing at their friends, going like, you are enough. Like, that is the core of community. And when behaviors do happen, because we all know behaviors happen, it's not about like, oh, we don't do that because that's what the music rules say. It's like, think about that choice. Is that what we do in our community? It all ties back to that word. Like, how do you think that person feels in that way? And when we talk about those norms, is that they've created themselves, just like what Alysia said. It's more about, okay, does that person feel like they belong here because of that choice? So they're thinking of, oh, the consequence of that action, as opposed to, oh, let me make sure I'm good so I can earn a sticker by the end of the day, which sometimes we do just to get the day going, but that doesn't necessarily teach them the SEL skill of being socially aware, which is again tied to community. So those are the little practical things I think of, especially as teachers. We see and hear these, oh my gosh, community, how do I do that? It's on those little things that we do.
Yeah, absolutely. And not to underestimate the power that those little adjustments have in actually lending to greater understanding. You know, the essential question of what are the values of a great musician? I think, Alysia, I'm paraphrasing what you said, but then, you know, Darlene, the meaning that students are able to make by seeing that model is really something lasting. So when we talk about essential questions and enduring understandings, I mean, this is the foundation of it all. So I did want to get back to that question that someone held about the, so the question specifically was for Alysia. Can you say again what you suggest an idea and expect it to change? Can you give an example? So within your segment, you made mention, I think just now there was sort of a nod back to that. Yeah.
In improv, I'm an improver as well. So in improv, we call it chaff ideas, right? They're ideas like when you're digging for gold. It's not gold. It's not gold. It's not great, but it's something. And we can work with something. We can't work with nothing. So we want students to take that. And this is a risk. This is that idea of why we build relationships, right? So that the students can take those risks and around being vulnerable, sharing a piece of an idea, talking and speaking in draft. But if we don't get the drafts out, then we have nothing to work with. So we really want to encourage students to do that. But we also want to, when we're working collaboratively, we want, you know, sometimes we as humans can be proprietary over our little nuggets, even when we know it's not fully formed. We want them to know that it may grow and change. Okay. So if you put out an idea for a verse, and then someone might add to that and say, oh, what if the notes actually went down at the end of the phrase? What if it turned down instead of turned up? But that might make it sound a little more final. Okay, great. Now you can't get mad. Now you got to go with the flow. But now that's something that takes some time to build, right? But this idea, if we don't allow, especially when working collaboratively, a lot of artists get stuck in a draft place. You're like, I know what I'm kind of imagining, but the draft sometimes is the scariest part to put out something, to move it from inside to out. So that's one of those tools that we use to encourage. And in those kind of tense moments where we're like, anybody have any ideas? Because I'm not sharing my melodic ideas with the students during collaborative songwriting sessions. It's their song, right? So I'm, okay, we'll keep thinking. We want students to feel encouraged to be like, well, all I've got is da, 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 da. That's all I got. And somebody else can add on to it. So that's one of those theatrical improv ideas, but it really works, of course, in building students' confidence in the draft. And the last thing I'll say is then they get confidence in the fact that works. If I put out it's that stone soup metaphor, right? If I just give a little something, I believe in the power of this collective to elevate it together. And that creates a sense of belonging and connection, right? Look what we did, where you don't want to see a song like Home and say, oh, I wrote that part or that section. You want to be like, I just contributed. I don't really know where my thoughts end with yours. And that is a very powerful feeling and an opportunity to give to a student.
It certainly is. It certainly is. And I think, you know, when I heard you just now describing that, I thought about those anchor standards that fall under the artistic process of create, and the idea that you're talking about refinement. But the beauty of what you described is that that refinement is happening as a collaborative process. And so therefore, again, it's allowing students to experience through their musical education that sense of possibility and that sense of success when it then comes, you know, to fruition into this beautiful song that they can, you know that they had that part in. So another question, so are there signs, some early signs that building belonging and community is beginning to take root, it's beginning to work? So I guess the follow-up question that I see is, how do I know I'm doing the work? So if you were to think about this, and I know it doesn't unfold in one single way, and there's no direct formula, but if you were to think about some of the signs or some of the conditions that you could describe when you know it's starting to take root, what would that look like? And Darlene, let me begin with you if you have some thoughts about that question.
That's a really good question, because, you know, for us teachers, we need that evidence to see, like, well, is this really happening or not? If there is any moment where I'm like, this is part of building community, I'm like, yes, thank you for showing that. Because I think sometimes we teachers, we really want to see like something really big and obvious to see if something's making progress, when sometimes it's just happening really slowly over time, and maybe it's happening when we're not even looking, maybe it's happening when they're lining up. So for me, I'm thinking of a very specific moment. Again, I'm just thinking of kindergarten, because those kinders, there was a moment where there was a student who his first language is Vietnamese, has, you know, a tough time just understanding what's happening. And earlier, the kids were just kind of leaving him alone, and I had to just remind every week, I said, this is a community, we help each other. Remember our song, I am enough and you are enough. We're also learning another song, also by Miss Katie Sings, where the words are, together, together, we help one another, together, together, we're stronger than before. And with that, I saw a girl seeing that our friend was struggling listening, and she goes, you know what, I'm going to help you. She said, take him by the hand and help him carry his little magical scarf away. And I said, this is community, everyone, because kids also need to see tangible examples. And when they see that in front of them, a lot of times it's going to click. And usually I see a domino effect after that. When I see one person do it, it's infectious. Like, everyone's going to start doing it, especially when they see the teacher lining up with that. So
there were so many things that you said there, you know, but the last thing you said about naming it when you see it, so that we are becoming more explicit with students to make the connections. By naming it, they're better able to make connections, and then they're better able to make the connections to the actions and to take those actions, you know, independently, like the example that you just described.
Right, because sometimes we automatically go, nope, that's not build community. Nope, we often, you know, speak more when it's not what we think it should be.
Then affirming.
Well, then what is it?
Is. Right. The idea of affirming, you know, instead of naming what it's not, to really take the opportunity to name what it is. Great. Alysia, do you have thoughts on that same question?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that idea of naming. I like to just be very explicit with students. And something that I do is I embed those community principles into our assessments. So just turning in a beautiful product will not get the grade. We want to look at the way you're working, not just the product in the end. And so also not just the artistic verbs that you're using, but the collaborative verbs and the communicative verbs. So I always have a habit of mind or a 21st century skill or an SEL competence piece in the assessment, and they are assessing themselves to see what's working. And I choose those based off of their feedback, because I also believe in developing success criteria to assess students collaboratively. So I may come with, again, a chaff of an assessment list, and then we decide together what's very important for this project or for this song or for this initiative or whatever we're doing, this kind of unit or whatever unit of study. They get to decide, and we can have a conversation. Well, I've noticed there's been a lot of bickering at the thing. Well, do you think that this might be a good opportunity for us to build these teamwork skills? What about this one in particular? And they choose. So I think that's another way that you can just kind of settle into that, of just simply allowing the students to assess it along the way. And the last thing I'll say is also, people are gonna laugh, asking the students, I'm not noticing, I just want to know how you're feeling. I know we've been talking about community and building it. Are we doing that? Are you all feeling connected to each other? Give me an example. Because I teach a lot of middle school students. And if you know anything about middle school students are sneaky, and you could be looking with your eyes and you're not seeing the communication that's happening, even though you're looking, right? We've all had that experience. A mom calls and says, such and such said this happened in class. You're like, in my class where I was looking the whole time. So it's important sometimes to just, check in with them. People the children are deep wells of information and emotions. And I think they appreciate that opportunity to share.
Yeah. What a great point, particularly in this series, the focus of which is student empowerment. And so going to the source can never be a bad idea, right? And going directly to the student. So a question on developing assessment. So you just mentioned, Alysia, that you have determined that it's important, and you will weave into the assessment process aspects of social emotional learning or whatever the values are that you want to show up through the process. You will weave that into your assessment. So there is a question about resources for developing assessments. The specific class seems to be teaching virtually and in person, piano and music theory. So maybe some general resources or places that either of you could suggest. But in particular, this person who asked the question teaches piano and music theory. So I don't know if there are some more detailed resources around those two particular areas.
Well, I can say for me, when I think about assessment, I think of categories of assessment. So I'm a choir person. So I'm looking at the musical, or what we say sometimes, the musicianship skills, the actions that I need students to do. Maybe some of them are vocal pedagogy goals. Some of them may be literacy or understanding or hearing or listening or feeling music goals. But what are those kind of actionable things? And then I'm also looking at the process, right? And how my students are understanding the creative process, right? How they're able to articulate it through the process. And that is an important part. You can't just, make something beautiful. And I said, well, tell me about it. And you're like, I don't know. So I need to articulate what's happening and add that metacognitive piece. So you want your students to talk about their own processes. And then the last piece, of course, is the quality of all of that. So I think the habits of mind, the Harvard Zone habits of mind, artist habits of mind, studio habits of mind, whatever you call them, they, go by both. Those are great ways to think about the quality of the artistic processes, where things like the 21st century skills, communication, cooperation, those critical thinking, those are great ways to think about what I would say are those, of course, those we used to call them soft skills, right? And so you can break those down, right? And you can line those up as well. You can also pull into that realm of arena those SEL competence pieces. What I like to do is make the first step in doing all of that is, what's the big idea of what we're doing? What are we exploring? What question are we exploring through this experience? And that helps us then, if we're singing a piece of repertoire that's asking us about the nature of family, right? Then how can we use how can we use that question to shape the way we're going to work together? It doesn't make sense to write a song about family and fight the whole way through. We're not Fleetwood Mac. We got to do something else. Okay. So how can we make sure the process also reflects the beauty that we want to see in the product? So that's a great way to start. Make sure you have that big idea first that kids are exploring through whatever project you're working on.
Yes. Great. Darlene, I don't know whether or not you have some resources or additional thoughts about that. If so, I just want to make sure I make the time here.
Nope, none. Alysia said it all. Yeah, I was like, well, that's it. Yeah.
Great. So I would love to ask, what are some of additional suggestions that you would share with educators here with us tonight as they are preparing to model artistic SEL that will build upon, some of the themes of belonging, like valuing diverse thoughts and feelings and perspectives. And, let's say, for example, you are asking students to respond to a piece of music. How can educators model what they like? What are some practices that you think are really core for modeling in order to have the students internalize the types of behaviors and practices that we value, that will lead to that sense of belonging and sense of community? So really the question is about modeling and some strategies there.
For me, I do a lot of partner work or small group work. I also respect when students say, I'd rather work by myself. And I say, yep, that's fine. You do you. And whenever I introduce anything new, it's always asking them, what do you think this is? So instead of me going, today we're going to learn about, for this month, third grade is doing mariachi music. Instead of going, this is what it is, and I will tell you everything. Because again, we have the mindset of like vessels versus vessels that need to be filled versus like assets. I said, here's mariachi music, but before we look at it, what do you think it is? Because I also want to see what their initial thoughts are, because that's also going to affect how I lay the groundwork for everything else after. And also prioritizing more of student talk rather than teacher talk. If there are instances where maybe they're having trouble doing that, then yes, that would be an opportunity for me to take a student and go, okay, let me show you what this can look like and develop norms on how to listen to one another. Because sometimes there are students, especially with this school year, they need to learn how to build those skills. And some people may think, but there's not enough time in the music time. Well, guess what? When you take the time to do that, then you don't need to worry about it for the rest of the school year. It's a skill you build because they're going to need to do that skill everywhere they go. So that's how I would do it, at least in my elementary classroom.
Great. Yes, thank you for that. Alysia, your thoughts?
Yeah, one of those SEL skills that I think that can be so helpful in all of the domains of SEL is this idea of reflection, right? It really hits on self-management. It hits on relationship skills, right? Just being able to really be, to reflect honestly. And that is something we practice in the arts all the time. So giving students opportunities to bring in that metacognition, to think about their thinking and then to share it. So you want to create opportunities for that in the space, not just at the very end, but throughout the processes, really. And the last thing I'll say about SEL is what's the first kind of SEL? Adult SEL. So in terms of building your own competence, yes, and centering your SEL competence in an anti-racist lens, that's the best thing you can do to elevate the pedagogy in your class. That's the best thing you can do. You can't build community through pedagogy. That people think it's possible, but it's not through the pedagogy. It's through the people. The people are the important part. The relationships sustain your pedagogy. It's not the other way around. So we've got to
the segue to the very last question.
Okay, great.
That is actually related to what you were just talking about. And the question is some safe ways to engage students in conversations about in dialogue together about belonging. So the fact that you just touched on, needing to invoke an anti-racist lens in all of this, I think, what are some other core principles, safe ways to engage students, so that the learning environments reflect the values? I don't know if, Darlene, you want to build on what Alysia began to share with us, or Alysia, if you have a closing thought about that.
What I know to be true is that educators that have an anti-racist, anti-bias lens are able to build community faster, stronger, and better than teachers who don't bring that lens to the work. So you want to make sure that you are able to do that. And there's lots of resources to build those kinds of skills and connections, right? And the tricks, the beautiful methods of meeting students at the door, which is, I can't stand it when a teacher doesn't meet a student at the door. I'm always like, what are you doing? But those kinds of things, they don't work. They don't work without anti-racism. When I was in college, I used to hang pictures on my wall using my shoes as a hammer, right? So we can use tools in any way we like, but if we want to be efficient, you have to have that lens. And so we're seeing teachers that are stepping up and taking the risk. Again, so you're modeling SEL right there, right? They're taking the risk to build, to be humble, to humbly, with humility, pursue anti-racism as a standard practice. We're seeing those teachers, we're seeing their pedagogy elevate because of this new lens that they're able to use in the classroom. So it's really at the root of it. I mean, these tools and tricks don't work without us as educators opening our eyes and managing our own perceptions and our own awareness, so that we can work collaboratively with students to, of course, place their voices at the center and build connective belongings. But you have to walk the walk. You have to talk the talk, and you've got to believe those things and embody them in your everyday life. So that's step one. Adult SEL is always the step one of student SEL. And it's important that we remember that every day, every single day.
Yes. Thank you for sharing that. Darlene, I don't know if there is something else. It was a pretty comprehensive answer there from Alysia. So I don't know if there's some other piece that you wanted to add, or if we shall turn this back over to Rebecca. But if you have a closing thought, I want to make time for that.
It all just starts with the kids, but also starts with ourselves first. People always ask, how do I do this? And every time, especially on those Facebook groups, I just want to get this sentence and copy and paste it. Have you asked your students yet? Have you asked your students yet? Did you model
in a series that is devoted to student empowerment, I think that is a wonderful closing thought. Have you asked your students? Mm-hmm. Great. Well, I thank you both for this very, very powerful episode, but dialogue. I thank you for all that you brought in terms of your own experience and wisdom, and that you were here to share it with us. So I will turn it over to Rebecca to wrap us up. Thank you to Dr. Lashley and to the whole team at the Save the Music Foundation.
All right. Thank you, Kira, Alysia, Darlene, for a wonderful discussion and sharing your stories and expertise. We could go on and on and on. And this concludes our webinar. Thank you again to the KKR COVID Response Fund for their generous support of this series. Thank you all for being here, and good night.